Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Relationship Blueprint, where we unlock your power of connection. And I'm so excited to be back. Today, I'm really thrilled to welcome Trish Sanders, a certified Imago advanced relationship therapist and workshop presenter. She's based in Paramus, New Jersey. With over 20 years of experience, Trish brings a vibrant blend of clinical rigor, creative modalities like play and sand therapy, and somatic awareness through Polyvagal Theory. She's the force behind the Getting the Love You Want retreats, communication and intimacy workshops, destigmatizing in her podcast, When Depression is in Your Bed. Drawing from her own healing journey, Trish leads with authenticity, helping couples and families build deeper connection and resilience. And without further ado, I just want to introduce Trish and thank you so much for being on the show today.
Coco, thank you. I want to take a moment to just really let that soak in. I really appreciated your words. They touched my heart and really felt authentically me. I was like, yes, that's me. This is what I'm doing in this world. And I'm so honored to be here with you.
Yeah. Is there anything I left out that you want to share with our listeners before we move on?
I honestly was so with you in that moment. I wasn't thinking, there was not one thought that came to mind that said, "Oh wait, but she didn't include this." It just felt really complete for this moment. There's always more, as we know.
Where I thought we'd begin really is with your podcast. Could you tell us a little bit? I mean, the title is so beautiful. When
Thank you.
depression is in your bed, it touches me deeply because of many reasons, but the vulnerability for you to share your own story. So tell us about how you came to this podcast. Where did it begin?
Well, it's actually, it starts off with a little bit of it was funny for me. It was a really funny moment with my husband, but maybe, I don't know, 2 years ago or so at this point, I was really working and figuring out in the therapy world, you hear about niching down your practice and, to be able to tell clients exactly who you help and all of that. And I had been really doing a lot of work, like, well, what's my specialty? What's my niche? Well, all this. And one day I turned to my husband and I said, Ben, I know what my specialty is. Like, my specialty is working with couples who live with depression. And it was like this revelation to me. And he looked at me and literally laughed and was like, obviously, like, this has been our life for like almost 20 years, you know? And it was so brand new to me, like that this is really what I know in my bones and what I live. And in addition to knowing the hardships and the challenges, like I know how to connect through it and grow through it, and to maintain and keep and enjoy a relationship with another person through this. And so he was just, so, I don't know, unsurprised, or I don't know. He was just so confident that I really knew what I was talking about. Like it was like so plain to him, I guess.
Yeah.
And so I kind of started this journey of how do I really bring this experience that I have into the world. And of course, I do and plan and have through my therapy work and working with couples and expanding into doing the retreats. And I certainly bring my unique perspective into that as well. But all of a sudden, it just came into my plate that doing a podcast was a way to literally share my story in a way that I think I love writing as well, but it's a totally different medium. Like I said, it's literally my voice, and I think that there's a vulnerability or an authenticity that is able to come through just in a different way. I think that comes through in writing as well, of course, but in a different way when people can really hear me. So that's when it began, and I didn't know what I was doing at all.
I know that
Uh,
feeling.
I,
I know
I I
that
didn't even
feeling.
listen to podcasts, to be honest. I was interested in them, but I'm a busy mom of two and all of this. But I just dove in and started to create it. And the name When Depression is in Your Bed really was just, it just came to me quickly because I think that when depression is in your bed, it affects everything. It affects how you sleep. It affects how you dream. It affects, how you feel going to bed. Or do you have insomnia? Can you not get to bed? Do you not want to get out of bed? Right? It affects how you open your eyes and look at the day. And it certainly affects every part of your relationship. When you're laying in bed next to somebody and you're feeling so disconnected, I can feel tears in my eyes because I know that experience of feeling so alone from both sides, both being the person who feels depressed and also my husband himself lives with depression. So I know what it feels like to be on the other side as the partner. And of course, it affects your sex life and physical intimacy and all of those things as well. And so it just felt like it described really what I wanted to share, what it's like, and also what it can be like.
Wow. I really, really love the vulnerability. And I feel like this is one of the things that many therapists struggle with is how vulnerable should I be? How much should my clients know about me personally? And I think that our training really helps us get past that because it's really not about us. It's really about how do we use our tools, experience, training to really help people get through whatever they're getting through. And I just so appreciate your truth and how important it is for people to know therapists get depressed. We're not cured because we're therapists. And that many of us come into this field because of I have suffered with anxiety most of my life. And what Imago has done for me has been nothing short of a miracle. So I love your story. And so where do people listen to you? Just I want to get to that for sure today.
Sure. I'm on the big platforms, Apple Podcasts and Spotify and YouTube, Audible and Amazon Music, and I'm going to add on some of the other platforms as well. But you can search when depression is in your bed, and you will find me. You also can go to my I know a lot of people, myself included, did not understand the podcast world or how to find a podcast. And so if you're interested, you can even just go to my website, which is wholefamilynj.com, and you can go to my podcast tab and you'll find the episodes there. It might be easier than having to find your way through a podcast platform.
I like that people are going to be able to access you after this because there's so much that you have to share with us today. So when you think about with this awareness that you had with your husband that he saw clearly and you had an aha moment, but since then, how would you say that your work, really your personal work, has transformed your professional work? Tell us about that story.
Oh, goodness, there's such a real beautiful interplay, I think, between my personal and professional. I started out as a play therapist, and I'm still a play therapist, and I work with children and teens. And way back, and again, I still technically specialize in this. It's just not a bulk of the work that I do in my day-to-day practice now. But I've always worked with children and teens who have experienced trauma or abuse or witnessed domestic violence. So it's a lot of attachment and relational trauma. And so that's really been the root of what I've done forever. And I really did not like working with grown-ups. I mean, it's just the truth. I did not like it at all, probably because I was, 24, right? When you're starting, when you come out of school. And I think working with grown-ups felt a little bit unsafe to me. And working with kids felt very comfortable. And I understood the symbolism of play. It just made sense in my brain and my body. And so I did that work for many years and loved it and still do love that work. And then all the while, I was having this, very challenging relationship with my boyfriend. Actually, my now husband, we were dating when I was in graduate school, and then eventually got married. And we were having these huge relational problems, these huge struggles with depression and anxiety as well. And they led to us separating just over 10 years ago now. And our son was born, actually. Our son's 13 now. He was 2 or 3 when we separated. And I had known about Imago at the time. I actually owned the Getting the Love You Want book at the time. We had read it. My husband and I, my boyfriend and eventually husband, had read it. But when we got to the exercise part, I had a little habit of doing his exercises for him, and because he would say, like, I didn't experience any childhood hurts, and I was like, yes, you did.
Right. It's
I
doing the book is great. The book is great. However, doing the exercises on your own, I would say for everyone, be a little warned about that. If having someone to facilitate it's a whole different experience.
It was a whole different experience for sure, and I've learned a lot through being able to work with Imago therapists and going to the Getting the Love You Want workshop and all of that. So I've learned that my help was not always really so very helpful.
So you really found Imago like many of us do. It came from a need.
Yes.
Came from a need. And you were in this relationship dance with your husband, it really tore you apart, the conflict, the power struggle, so we say. And in addition, you had these mental health issues, anxiety and depression that were really getting in the way of connection, it sounds like. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think for us, my husband and I, one of the most challenging things was that we knew we loved each other.
Yeah.
Even in our separation, my husband said, listen, I love you. I will always love you. We will be wonderful co-parents. You will always be my friend. We just don't know how to make this relationship feel good for both of us. And he wasn't wrong in any sense, but there was a part of me that said, but there's something here. Like, how can we have all of this and still be miserable so often? Like, this just doesn't make sense. And then I was able to convince my husband, while we were separated, to come to a workshop, which was pretty extraordinary. And as Harville himself did tell me at the workshop, your partner doesn't come to a couple's weekend if they don't care about the relationship at all, right? If they're hopeless, if they don't want to do any work, if you mean nothing to them, essentially, they're not gonna take this huge emotional risk. And so, and I really the I won't go into the whole story, but basically, my husband had left during some of the exercises that weekend, and I ended up talking to Harville and said, like, what do I do now? My
Yeah.
husband came, but he left. And he was like, wow, you and this relationship really matter because he's here. And when I was able to, I mean, that was one of so many shifts that happened that weekend, that I was able to say, wow, okay, right, this relationship matters. This is just really overwhelming. This is hard stuff that we're doing. And so we went to the workshop, and for me, it was absolutely life-changing. And again, you asked about the personal and professional. It changed me. I saw things that I had just never seen or understood before. I saw them in a new way. I felt completely empowered in what I needed to do in the relationship, which, spoiler alert, I was just blaming my husband a lot prior to that. Maybe that sounds familiar to some of your listeners if you find yourself in that position. And then it changed my work eventually as well. I mean, right away, how I worked in the office, I started bringing the dialogue into the office. And then within a month or so, my husband and I decided to recommit to our marriage. And we've been working the Imago work and walking the Imago path since then.
So what you've said so many things that I want to sort of circle back to.
Sure.
Your journey sounds so familiar, right? From our couples that come in. They love each other. They come into the office or they come to the workshop because they're not wanting to let go of the relationship, but they also don't know another way to fix it. Most people, including myself, believe that if you could just make him do the right thing, then I'd be better. If you could fix him, that would be great because I'll bring you to the workshop, you fix him, and then everything will be fine.
Yeah, obviously.
Obviously. And so I think that experience is so important, not only as a participant, but as a therapist, because we've had so much training and at our own therapy, most of us, that when you go to the workshop and the transformation that happens about your awareness is kind of like, it blew me away. Like what
Totally.
I was bringing to relationships that I had no awareness of and where they came from my childhood. And so your story is so lovely. And so it touches me so deeply because it's such a common thread that we share, the people that are so in love with this work. In fact, I had someone say, it might have been one of my kids, is this a cult? Like, because you're like a mago, a mago. And I said, no, it's not a cult. But when something saves your life, you really find something that is transformational. Once you see, you can't unsee it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I felt that way. And so again, I was a play therapist working with kids and teens. And by the end of that year, I had registered for the Imago basic training to become a couples therapist, which was an enormous shift from, I mean, again, I never stopped working with kids, but adding by choice, not just grown-ups, but working with couples, it was this soul-led obligation, like I was just following my path. I experienced this. I saw what it did for me and for my husband, and I knew that I had to be one of the people who are bringing it out there into the world. I knew that was my part of my purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting. I don't know if you knew this, but I worked with children for 30 some years. And yeah, and I did play therapy and sand tray work. And I really got burned out. And so when I was planning my exit strategy I was working in a school setting, I was pretty much traumatized. I know that I had secondary trauma from all the years working in the school, working with DSS and court cases and the police, the domestic violence, the child abuse. I took it home with me, Trish. I wasn't able to let it go. And And so what I decided then was it's a longer story how I found Imago, but I knew that I could help couples. And if I could help couples, I could really help children. And this feels so much more comfortable for me because I wasn't able to make clear boundaries around the kids, but I can with adults. And so it was an interesting shift, similar to your story and different from your story.
Yes, yes. And I think that that's true. And I imagine that most, if not very close to all therapists who work with children know that feeling of, first of all, how to need to create boundaries so you don't, because you want to, I mean, I can think back decades and remember the names and faces of kids that I wish I could have adopted.
Yeah.
I mean, I have my list,
Yeah.
right? And I know that feeling. And also you figure out pretty quickly that you only get this tiny little window with this little human, and you hope that you're having an impact. And my view of doing child therapy is very much to certainly create some safe space and a healing environment for children, but also I see it as a way that they have a positive introduction into healing work and therapy, that when they're older they'll say, oh, I tried therapy when I was a kid, let me try it again as an adult, because
Yes.
developmentally there's only so much you can only access what you can access where you are.
Yeah.
And so, probably a lot of children who come to therapy are going to return to therapy, or hopefully will return to therapy later in adult life. And you realize that they go home to their parents and their caregivers, and that can be really wonderful. And it can be not so wonderful in a lot of ways, even with really loving parents.
Absolutely.
I mean, even with parents who mean, I've had so many conversations over the years with parents who say, how could, especially with teenagers, like, how could my kid think that I hate them, or that I don't like them? Like, I do everything for them. I live for them. I would do anything for them. How could they say, and they get, deeply offended. How could their kid feel this way or think this or not understand or receive their love, right?
Right.
Receiving love is such a hard thing sometimes. And you start to look at what's happening. I think for me now, I've always had a lot of perspective on this, but now I really see it as deeply rooted in nervous system perspective, and as my own experience as a mom, especially now I'm a mom of a teenager, really being,
Welcome.
yes.
Welcome. I want to reassure you, they come back. Come
Well,
back.
I have to say I've been pretty bold knowingly for many years, because I have said, and we'll see, my son's only 13, so he's just into, I mean, he's been into it for a few years, honestly, but he has many years to go still. So we'll do a follow-up in about 6 years. But I've always said that the age child that I feel most ready to parent is a teenager, because I've always worked really well with that population, that age, and I've always understood. And that didn't mean that I thought that I was going to be a perfect parent of a teenager, by
Right.
the way. But I knew enough to know that that was not ever going to be possible. But I felt like I really understood what it was like to be a teenager, and for me to be a very depressed teenager and wanting connection and not knowing how to get it, and being sort of rebellious and difficult. I imagine, like, sort of like, someone said this to me many years ago as a friend, but she said, I know I have this hard outside, but I'm just a marshmallow on the inside. And that's what teenagers are so
Yeah.
often. They're like tough and hard and mean, but on the inside, they're just like ooey gooey, and they just need so much softness. So I've said for many, many years, we'll see. I'm aware that I might, eat my words at some point. But at this point, it's no easy task to parent a teenager. I don't think it's any easy task to be a teenager either. But we talk a lot about, using mirroring. I mean, we dialogue a lot, and we also talk nervous systems every day. So, we're doing it. We're figuring it out.
Well, I love what you're saying and about really understanding that age group, because it's a little bit of a mystery. I think partly because every generation, my husband and I were talking about it yesterday, and I have a client who was coming in and saying, that her daughter talked to her terribly. And what I had to remind her of is that our generation was parented often by guilt, and that this generation, we didn't hopefully do much of that. We're all trying to do better, but in our effort to really give more unconditional love to our kids, that they're going to behave differently than we did. It's just a different way of raising kids. And so changing and shifting expectations, I would have never done that, to, what other influences are impacting my child that I really had nothing to do with. It's not that personalization, like I'm doing the bad job,
Yeah.
which is, I think, at the heart of the pain is like, what have I done wrong?
Oh,
Right?
yes.
Versus what you have, which is the tools. They've been introduced. You're an Imago parent from a
Yeah.
very early age. And so they don't think it's weird to dialogue. You have that structure
Yeah.
to be able to communicate, and how few people in the world actually have that. So I know that this is going to be a great journey for you. And I think we should definitely do another podcast around teenagers because it's hard.
So hard, so hard. Again, like I can see when I'm regulated and my nervous system is feeling safe and I, feel my feet firmly on the ground and I'm not, I call it the roller coaster of adolescence and I'm not going for the loops, with my son, which I sometimes get on the ride because
Right.
I'm also
Sure.
human, you
Yeah.
know, but I can see his dysregulation and I can see how he's just moving into needing to protect himself, and I can see the defenses and all these protective factors. And from, my son and I would be happy to come back and talk, more about teenagers specifically, but he had early medical trauma. He was born with a heart defect and needed open heart surgery. And he was 9 days old. So he absolutely needed to shut down and withdraw and go into this, collapsed place for safety right from birth. And thank goodness he had that accessible to him. And what that looks like for a 13-year-old who has that memory in his body of shutdown and fear to protect, along with, I mean, being being my child and dealing with two parents who were depressed. I mean, by the time he came around, my son was born, I stepped very much into the overperformer role, you could call it, and my husband stayed, in the underperforming, kind of disconnected, very depressed place for a long time. But my son's early life was really hard. And like I said, I can see the defenses and how he protected himself. And so now as a teenager, I really see my role as a parent in providing that empathy and that validation, which of course are core Imago skills, and being able to create that space where he can stretch into feeling safe with taking risks and coming out of his, protective little turtle shell.
You've mentioned some vocabulary that we as therapists, it's part of our lives, but dysregulated, help our listeners just understand not only what it means, but how to identify it.
Yes, that's such a great question. I do. My son asks me, Mom, can we go like 30 minutes without saying the word dysregulated? So I use the word dysregulated a lot. And it's very helpful to slow down and name it, I think. I think that dysregulation, simply as I think of it anyway, is when we feel like we need to protect ourselves in some way, and we can identify it when we feel that defensiveness or that urge to sort of fight or correct or control or run, get away, or shut down, disconnect and avoid altogether. And those are our defense strategies that are hardwired into our brain, that and people often know the fight or flight response. That's our, mobilized response to threat. Like my body notices something that is threatening it and I have to do something about it,
Yeah.
and we know that charged, very fiery, often feeling
Yeah.
that comes with that. And then if you feel like you just don't have it left, you don't have the resources left, you don't have the fight in you, you don't have the energy, you don't know how, we can fall into that freeze place. And so that fight or flight or that freeze is that dysregulation. And I'm referring specifically to our nervous system. In Imago, we refer to it as dysregulation, but also as reactivity,
Mm.
or our defenses. But when we feel like we need to stand our ground, that kind of feeling, I think that for me, and I think that this is probably true for many, but I notice a lot of feeling of I have to do it on my own, whether that means like, so there's a lot of isolation, like I can do it, or only I can do
Yeah.
it right, or it can only be done my way, or no one's ever there to help me, or a lot of hopelessness around it.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's kind of when I feel that disconnect, I know that I'm dysregulated. And if I'm thinking a lot of negative stories, people don't always see them as stories, but the interpretations that we make about what's happening in any given moment. And I'm telling myself a very negative story, like my husband is horrible and I'm a failure of a parent, and and I have no idea how to make
It's all
anything
bad.
better.
It's all bad.
Those are
Everything.
right. Those are all good
And I'm
signs.
bad too.
I'm probably dysregulated.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting too that Imago and polyvagal, like really, we often live from our neck up. We don't realize that our body has this memory, right? And so when I feel the dysregulation, I know that it starts here for me, almost like I can't talk.
Mm,
A little frozenness. And I think that helping people start to notice, like the next time you have a fight, like notice if you can stop yourself and where am I feeling this right now?
yes.
Because we're very programmed to live here. And when we cut this off, we're really not accessing so much of our power and little warning signs. Like, I feel this throat thing. Here it comes. I'm in a story that, my daughter's mad at me or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So I think what you're really leading to is also your great experience and your depth of knowledge around polyvagal. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, sure. Polyvagal is a little newer to me than Imago is. I've only been training in polyvagal theory for the last 2.5 years or so, so it feels very new. However, just like with Imago, when I found it, it was like a key in a lock. It was like, wow, okay, this is the answer. This is the missing piece that I didn't have before. And also, much like Imago, it gave me a whole new language in order to identify what was actually happening and understand the process with greater compassion and kindness and forgiveness, both for myself and for others. But polyvagal theory is about our nervous system and how our nervous system is really at the root of our whole experience of life, how we perceive ourselves, how we perceive and experience others and the world. And our nervous system can only be in three states. All humans, this is just true for everyone. It's a beautiful commonality amongst, the humans as species, which we can feel so different and so othered and separate. This is a really connecting experience for all of humanity, that we can either be in our safe state, grounded. That's called ventral. That's the language there. With my 6-year-old daughter, I call it the sunny place.
Great. I love
Yeah,
sunny place.
yeah.
I'm in my sunny place.
Yeah. And we talk
Uh-huh.
about how to get back to the sunny place. And then you have, as I mentioned before, that fight or flight is the sympathetic state of your nervous system, that mobilize, charge, protect yourself. I have to do something. We call that the stormy place. And then the dorsal experience is that depressed place, that stuck, frozen, freeze response, shutdown, collapse. We call that the cloudy place. With my daughter. And, we perceive the world based on the state of our nervous system. And so if you can imagine, like, I don't know, like forgetting your keys or some like tiny little frustrating experience. If you're in a ventral state and you're like, oh, I forgot my keys, like, let me go get them, or let me call my husband and see if he can bring them to me or something. It's like, oh, no big deal. Like, I have what I need to figure out this problem,
Yeah.
But if it happens, if you're like me, you're maybe probably running late and maybe you're a little sympathetically charged. And then you're like, oh my goodness, like this always happens. What's wrong with me? I can't get my stuff together. And, and it feels like this horrible tragedy, or you just can't figure it out. And then you're like, "Ah, they're right here." And then you're mad at yourself that they were, right next to your phone the whole time. Kind of thing. Or if you're in that dorsal place, that shutdown collapse and everything. I mean, I describe it as very bleak, gray, dreary, and then you're just like, oh, I'm hopeless. I'll never figure this out. I'm not even gonna go out today. I can't find my keys,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so to understand that, when I learned that the nervous system experience, like the state of my nervous system colors the lens that I look through. I've actually always called it depression goggles. I like knew forever, as long as with all my teens in therapy for years, I've said, you have your depression goggles on and eventually they're going to come off. You might not know how to take them off right now, but they will in fact come off and the world's going to look really different. So what can you do to help them come off, and what can you do to feel better while they're still on? And so I knew about this, but I didn't have the nervous system language years ago. And that's how I really describe my own experience, thinking back. I'm like going back to like 16 years old, 15 years old. And I was like, okay, I have on my depression goggles. Like they're going to come off eventually. And so when I learned about polyvagal theory, and I said, oh my gosh, there's like this biological, neurological reason. Like there's this, interplay between my nervous system and my brain. Like I'm not crazy. That was a pretty good feeling.
Validating, right? It's like, oh my God. And that you have some ability to change.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And, I love your languaging. I love your metaphors because when I think about it, even though you're explaining this to your daughter, I think couples could say, yeah, I'm in a sunny place. It doesn't bother me. Or
Yeah.
I'm feeling the storm and I'm not going to be able to dialogue with you right now because I'm in a storm. Or, it's cloudy and I can't make myself go out to dinner tonight. I love the language
Yeah.
because when we could share common language and the depression goggles, how brilliant is that? Because it really is a disease of perception, right? Most things are. So when we think about our lenses not being clear, so helpful, like, well, then how do I get them clear?
Yeah. And for me, relationally, and I this is harder to do in some moments than in others, but it's really a tool that I've been able to have a lot more compassion for my husband. He hasn't had a severe depressive episode in quite some time, many years at this point, but he does have more of that sort of what I would refer to as sympathetically charged energy, which is kind of like that anxious or like frustrated, he's had a bad day at work kind of energy. That kind of happens a little bit more frequently these days than, like I said, the depressive episodes rarely happen now. But, I can look at him and either be like, wow, he's a real jerk.
Yeah,
And I can get really annoyed and kind of get that same sympathetic fight or flight charge and either want to
absolutely.
kind of pick a fight or be a little difficult or kind of just avoid him altogether, sort of thing. Or I can say, okay, like, let me ground myself, let me anchor in my event, let me allow my nervous system to anchor in a ventral space, which feels better to me and to him,
Mhm.
quite frankly. And then I can say, all right, he has his, fight or flight lenses, his sympathetic goggles on, and he doesn't want to be frustrated or unhappy or short or whatever. He's just kind of living his own experience. And how do I engage? Do I say, hey, babe, like, had a tough day? Is there anything I can do to connect with you? And sometimes, especially when I come from that place, he might say like, oh, I just need to unwind or whatever. Or he might say, actually, yeah, that would be great. Like, can we, whatever, go to dinner? What can we watch a movie after the kids go to sleep? I just need to relax. And it just allows understanding. We take things so personally. We take things personally, have taken things, and we think that it means our partner doesn't love us or doesn't care, or if they knew us or if we were important to them, they would do this thing.
They would know how to make us
Right?
think. They should know. They should be able to read our minds and know they have lived with us this long. If they
Yes.
don't know what to do by now, then something's wrong with them, right?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Our 15-year wedding anniversary just passed a couple weeks ago, and we had a little minor conflict that turned into a big story. And that was very much the story. I was like, we've been married for 15 years, we've been together for 21. If we haven't figured this out by now, we should just throw in the towel. But I was able to recognize, like, okay, this isn't true. It's not true either. In this moment, it just is the thought in my head,
Yeah.
and I didn't like fuel the fire, and I also didn't try to like push myself somewhere where I wasn't quite ready to be, like a
Mhm.
softer place. And then I kind of like let it just sort of, I imagine it like kind of cascading down. And then eventually the waterfall of, pounding waterfall ran dry. And I was able to take a breath and regulate a little bit and say, you know what? Let me reconnect about this. And I was able to reconnect with my husband. And thankfully, he had also regulated himself. And we said we should really dialogue about what happened before. It was a little relatively minor thing that, minor things turn into big things because they're connected to so many other important needs and unmet needs and all of that. And that was very much what was happening. And we were able to reconnect and have a lovely anniversary dinner. So I'm thankful literally every day for Imago and Polyvagal Theory because it really shapes my life in a much better way than I was able to shape my life. I was kind of like at the mercy of what was before. And now
Yeah.
I feel like I have a lot more choice.
So you're actually really accessing your power. I think that, that's what this is all about. When I created this podcast, it's like we are not powerless. We have choices. It's all decision making. But when we're in that state, in that stormy state, it's really hard to make a good choice because I always say my reptile got hijacked.
Yes.
And so, what I love about your story of your 15th anniversary is that little things turned into big things. We're human, and that being able to self regulate on your own and then come back together for the dialogue is the grown-up thing to do, but not the easiest thing to do. And, when my husband, when we travel now, I've picked up a pattern. Like he's more chill and I'm more anxious. We travel and man, that guy was wound tight and he still gets that way. And so what we finally figured out after a dialogue is this just really, it piques his anxiety that he's forgot something, that a number of things, right? So now I just look at him in the airport or wherever we are. I'm like, put my hand on him. What do you need? And he calms right down because it's the connection that we're trying to create, and that one of us is able to put on the big girl or big boy panties. Like it's bad when it happens to both of us at the same time, right? But when
Yes.
one of us can see, wow, you've been hijacked. I know something that I can try to help you instead of getting into that mess that is so painful.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, one of the other things that you talked about, I think that's important to just circle back to is you were talking about it with your 13-year-old son, but I know that this is part of who you are now because of your work. But you talked about validation. And I had an experience yesterday where my feelings had been really hurt and I had simmered on it. First, didn't simmer, boiling, then went to a slow boil, then I simmered, but I was able to talk to the person. And the person really offered what I would consider a validation, which was, I'm sorry. I probably should have communicated that better. And right away, I could feel all like the boiling stopped. It was all gone. It dissipated because it didn't matter what happened before, because you've just basically said, you made a mistake. Don't we all? So I think that validation piece is important. If anybody's going to try something at home, it's something you can take from this episode and really try to, like, how do I validate someone? So tell us more about how you validate and how that works in your relationships and what you teach your couples.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I remember so clearly in the Getting the Love You Want workshop that my husband and I attended when we were separated, and Harville was the facilitator. Actually, Helen had an emergency or something. She was there. It was just Harville that weekend, but I remember him saying at the workshop, everything that everyone does makes sense all the time. And that's a bold statement, and many people might hear that and say, like, absolutely not. There, no, no, no. I have 100 exceptions. Let me tell you about them. But in that moment, I really was able to receive that and say, okay, yes, okay, I want to know more. Like, this makes sense to me. And it was absolutely life-changing to not think of your partner as crazy or defective or there's something wrong with them because that I have to fix is often the end of that thought as well, right? Like it's my
I
responsibility.
love this conversation.
And so I was like, oh, okay, so everything makes sense. So now we could be curious, like what's happening that's creating this dynamic. And I'll tell you, for me, there's been like maybe like an interesting learning in the process because sometimes I say something that is, that I feel grounded. I feel like I'm in my ventral, my nervous system is feeling safe. And I really think about what I want to say to my husband as a validating statement, and it doesn't land as validating. And then I often get dysregulated after that because it comes with like the thought of like, I tried so hard and it still didn't work, that feeling of putting in effort and it not paying off, which is an old feeling. But I've learned, and nervous system has helped me with this as well, about how to validate like the state that somebody's in without, maybe it's a hazard of the job, but like without therapying it. I think I think I can get a little over validating or try to like jump into like my interpretation with the validation,
Oh, yeah.
saying like, oh, it totally makes sense to me that you're frustrated because of blah, 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 blah. But like, that's not really that's my story of the frustration, not necessarily my husband's or my son's. And so validation for me, again, adding the nervous system piece, it doesn't have to only be, but I think that for me, it feels sometimes a little bit safer and more accessible to say, like, I mean, nobody likes, I don't want to say nobody, but it's not always welcome for someone to say, like, oh, you're in the stormy place. Like, but that's not a validation. That can feel like a real attack. But if you can say, wow, it really makes sense that you're feeling, I keep things vague with my validations at this point. I found that those land better. Like, I see you're having some feelings about this, or I also validate in this way of saying my nervous system is experiencing a shift in your nervous system, and that makes sense. And I want to kind of slow down and get curious about it when we can. And I have found that those when things are activated, sort of general taking some ownership, like naming what's happening rather than interpreting what's
Yeah.
happening,
Yeah.
land as much safer ways of validating for both my husband and my son. And it totally makes sense for me too. I don't really want anyone quote unquote telling me how I feel.
Nobody does. Yeah.
That's not a well-received experience. So yeah, I think that validation of just saying like, okay, wow, like what you're experiencing right now really makes sense, and I want to know more. Like maybe it doesn't make sense to me yet, right? Maybe I would experience it differently. Or, I mean, my husband and I, we joke like we never experience the same thing the same way. Like what we always have the opposite experience or thought about just about everything in the world. So it's not that feeling of like, oh, I know I feel the same way or this is right. But like I said, I kind of keep things general, like, okay, yeah, like you're having feelings right now, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the safe when things are heated, when there's
Yeah.
some friction going on, some conflict, some dysregulation happening. That usually is a safe go-to for me. And that experience of a little sigh, a little breath that can happen that creates that softness that allows for more helpful conversation and dialogue to follow. Those are good then that's possible after that bit of validation.
That it's interesting because that too was one of the biggest ahas that I had from, I'm not sure if it was from workshop or the book, whatever, but for someone to validate me, myself, it makes sense that you're upset about that, but that it doesn't mean that you agree with me. You can just see you're leaving your world. You're coming into my world. You're seeing it like this person did yesterday. You're seeing it from my point of view. You had lots of reasons for what you did. I mean, she did have lots of reasons for what she did, but she left that world, came to my world and said, it makes sense that, I didn't communicate that with you, and I will do better. I will try to do better because she didn't use the word that makes sense because she doesn't use the dialogue, but I still got it. I got the validation. So I do think it's a challenging thing to ask people to do. I think even in my office, and I'm sure in your office, sometimes we just go with that made sense to me because they're
Yeah.
still in the mindset that means if I say to you, you make sense to me, Trish, that means I agree with you. And that is not it. It's
Yeah,
just saying, right? It's just, I really, really care about you, and I'm trying to really hard to see it through your eyes, and through your eyes, that makes sense.
yeah.
So that's a
Sorry.
big distinction, right? No, that's okay. We're having such a good
Yes, yes.
connection here. We're wanting to keep talking. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Well, I just agree with you so much. I was going to say, like, exactly what you're saying, that what it is not, that it's not agreement. That's how I usually start telling couples, like, just
Yeah.
to tell you what validation is, I tell you what it's not first, because it's hard to think that you're agreeing with your partner or saying that they're right,
Yeah.
especially when the thing that they're talking about is what the impact of something you did that had that to them, or the impact of what you did had on them. And I
Right.
think that that's like, the ultimate validation. And sometimes, certainly when I'm dysregulated or when I'm in the thick of it, in the heat of it, I'm not always paying attention to the impact that I had on my husband. I am paying attention to the impact that he's having on me. And so I have this pull for validation. I want to be validated. And then that can be the power struggle. Like, no, my feelings make sense. No, my feelings make sense. And being able to start that's a lot of growth that I have done. Being able to say, wow, I see how I have contributed to this, in a general way, the nightmare, of the
Yeah.
relationship. And then in much more specific ways, depending on different situations and hurts and conflicts and frustrations. But for me, being able to own that and say, wow, I'm impacting you, and not focus on how my husband is impacting me, and to know that that doesn't mean I'm going to ignore how he's impacting me. If I can get, I think validation is such a gift.
Yeah, it is a gift, and it's a gift to the relationship, because
Yeah.
what often happens is that the big or even the little thing that starts out as the fuel for the fire, right? The little thing that we start fighting about. I told you that they were coming for dinner Thursday. No, you didn't. How many people have that all the time? If we can stop it there and say, well, maybe you didn't hear me, or maybe I thought I said it. Regardless, they're coming and it makes sense. You'd be surprised because you don't remember hearing it. I know I said it, right? I mean, but it doesn't matter at that point. It just means the person didn't get it. So I go back to Brene Brown's work about the generous assumption. Are we big enough as people, right, to give our partner of all people and our children, the people we love most in the world, a generous assumption that they are not trying to hurt us? Can you do that? And I also was circling back when you've said it twice now that your husband has, and you have not had major bouts of depression in the last, I don't know how many years, but
many years. Yeah.
many years. And I was curious because of the whole, what we know now about our physiology. What do you attribute that to? That here you were having these bouts and it was so big that you separated. And now you're not having them. I think it's so important to tell our listeners what changed.
Oh gosh, that's a big question. And there's a lot of sort of small answers. I think that if I were to kind of try to group it together or kind of generally say what happened, in truth, I think that the shortest answer is that we learned how to connect. And again, Imago was really like the first major breakthrough that we could have these experiences of connection, which included, again, like the validation piece of me being able to validate his experience, because I was so invalidating without intending to be back then.
Right. Uh-huh.
And then with polyvagal theory, I've been on an incredible self journey with polyvagal theory as well. I mean, and with Imago too, of figuring out how to connect with myself and being able to be present and how to bring my whole self into the relationship and not feel like I'm going to lose myself or dissolve or be too big or be too small, like how to just be me in relationship. And I think that has been a huge contributing factor. Like I said, the ways it looks, there's a lot of other answers.
Sure. Yeah.
But depression, but another, again, sort of my own inner knowing, I have always said depression is disconnection. Again, before I had any of the language, going back to when I was a teenager, it was isolation, it was aloneness, it was feeling separate from the world, even when I could like see it, and it felt like the world was behind glass. I'd be with my friends as a teenager and they were right there, 6 feet away from me, but they felt like they were worlds apart. And I just knew that this is an experience of disconnection. And my husband and I didn't know how to connect. And again, like now I would add the nervous system layer of we didn't know how to connect when our nervous systems were in these protective, defending places, need to defend places. And through Imago, we had the experience of being able to connect, and more, we're able to say, hey, like, I'm out on my own here. It's scary. It's scary out here. It doesn't always sound that nice, by the way, but sometimes it does. Sometimes it really does sound just like that. And other times, you have to read between the lines and the way we sometimes communicate poorly when we're not feeling safe, when we feel like we have to defend ourselves. But being able to connect, and again, for myself and my own journey, being able to learn how to connect with myself has been it's a whole new world. Like it sounds like I think to say it sounds like it's cheesy or something like that, but it's true. I literally see a whole new world of possibility, of hope. I could even get a little bit teary-eyed thinking about my own transformation. My husband, I think he's on his own journey, which is different than mine. And without saying things, without his permission and his consent to say, I don't want to go too much into his journey, but I do think that I've seen his evolution and growth in his own way, which has been so different than the path I've traveled, of him coming back into connection with his self and knowing that I'm here. Because when you're depressed, you do not believe your partner cares. You do not believe your partner cares about you. And even if you think they might, you still think that your partner is better off without you because you're so awful and so horrible. And so depression as disconnection perpetuates itself. It's just a cycle that disconnection begets disconnection begets disconnection. And you just stay further and further and further and further, and you keep like building your case as to why this is really how it is. And we have been able to kind of like catch that story before it gets so deep in, before we're totally underwater with it. And now we're like, oh wait, the tide's coming in. I'm feeling disconnected. Like let's not go out there. And figuring out how to connect. I mean, that's right, that's the Imago thing, how to connect through difference, and how to find each other when you feel lost at sea, I think has been, I would describe it that way for myself. And that really has been, like I said, totally transformative in my own relationship to depression. And connect, I want to just say, because not everyone listening may have a partner or a relationship that's safe to connect to. And I really, what I'd want to say is that more powerful. I feel the emotions come up in my eyes because like I just know the feeling of feeling like there's nowhere to connect to, that you're totally alone in this world. And it's really just the story that you're telling yourself to protect yourself. And at one time you needed that story. At one time you needed to feel like you could do it all by yourself and you could hide and be safe, whatever that means to you, because it means different things to different people. But there's always something there to connect to, whether it's nature or a friend or music or, creating a relationship that feels safe enough to connect to, including the relationship you have with yourself. And that's really been my journey. And I'm able to access hope in a much more consistent way that feels more real than it's ever felt before. So anyway, I could talk about that quite a bit, but I hold a lot of hope for our world, even today. And amongst all the hard things that are happening in our world these days, all the disconnect. But I see our society as a very dysregulated society. And I think, and I don't think naively so, I think that connection is the antidote.
Well, that is powerful and beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing from your heart. I was thinking about what you said about depression and connection, and they say the same thing about addiction, that addiction is not around, the opposite of addiction isn't, sobriety, it's connection. And that what we're learning about so many things in mental health, and your story is really an anecdotal story of, I'm not saying you're not on medication, and I'm not saying that medication isn't the right thing. I'm just saying that your answer was so big that you and your husband found a way to connect. And since then, neither of you have had major bouts of depression. I will share my own experience as far as some difficulty in the most difficult times in our story. We lost a grandson in 2000, and we weren't connected through that grief. And it was the loneliest, saddest, angriest feeling I think I've ever had. And when we found connection, it didn't go away. There was still sadness there, but it made stronger, and we were able to navigate it together instead of in the same boat paddling in different ways. And so I love what you've shared today about, you've given us so much hope for those of us those people out there who are walking around with those depression goggles. I really hope that you listen to Trish's podcast, When Depression is in Your Bed. Learn more about polyvagal. There's so many ways that we can help ourselves. We need to access them. And so before we end today, I just want to say thank you to Trish, and thank you to our listeners for listening to us. And hopefully that you'll come back to the Relationship Blueprint again. Our next guest will be Banu. She's from Turkey, and she's been working in the earthquake zone and helping those people recover from their trauma. And many of us have recovered from trauma. All kinds of trauma is out there. So one is not more or bigger than the other. Trauma is trauma. So we look forward to seeing you again on the Relationship Blueprint, unlocking your power of connection. And as Trish so beautifully explained her journey to connection back to her husband, and how that's changed not only their marriage, but their mental health and their whole family. That their two children aren't watching two very depressed parents anymore. They're getting to live a real beautiful family life with its ups and downs, like all families, but they get to see a healthy mom and dad. And that's really powerful. Thank you again, Trish, and we'll see you next time on The Blueprint.